and can got it. All right, today we're taking a little bit of a break from our Jeremiah series because this has been pressing on my heart for a minute, and I mean like a few months, and it came to like a head, if you will, like over the last few days where I was like, no, we're gonna get to this. And it has a twofold reasoning. Not because I'm just like, oh, this is like, in this space of like, we have to deal with this, but I feel like it's so timely. And I think sometimes when we're dealing with a large, bit of content, it's really good to have some practical things that we can put into place. At our fingertips. And this is one of those like really, really like practical things, but it's practically deep. So we're going to look at similar to what we did last week. I won't show you a video, but I will give some resources on Patreon for the information I'm going to share, like on the tongue, because I'm going to get into some scientific things because I don't know. And like I said, there's a bunch of things that are kind of like engulfed in this whole lesson, but I really feel like Yah is pressing upon my heart that we need to understand why. And it's one of those things that unfortunately in religion, we read through text, and many of us have come out of that. And even now people read through definitions, but it's really with this like very, very religious lens, and practicality is only practical when it's religiously practiced, when you're being religious. And when it's a lifestyle, every word and everything that is in the text, every story moves away from religiosity. Yes, just came up with that, I think, and goes into everyday life practice. And so this was one of those things where I have like a funny background story for it, but it's really deep. And the writers, and specifically Yah, in the inspiration of the writers, are infinitely wiser than we will ever know. And so that's why I bring in science, because even though people are like, I don't really believe in science, or science is counter to my, belief system, we all can agree that people who are in those fields are smart. We don't go, oh, those are just really dumb people. Now we think they may be smart and they may not, they may miss things, but we look at a person who deals with cells and molecules and splitting atoms as people who are in mathematics and, engineering as people who are smart. And so when I say, yeah, it's infinitely wiser than we are, when we look at things where science is just now catching up to things that Torah said, and we talked about this last week, where Yah is like, if I would have told it to you like that, you would have never got it. So my goal within, the next few times we deal with stuff like this is to show you the complicated way of seeing things and then how easy Yah made it, and how these little nuances that we begin to live by as we read the scripture are literally so deeply embedded into like our everyday functioning of our body and our mind and our mouth and how our teeth work and so forth and so on, that it's just, we can't help but just listen to what he says. And as we begin to put those into practice practically, we'll see the benefits of a holistic return to him, not just one in mind, not just one in thought, not just one in religion, not just one in, ecstatic worship, but one in literally practical everyday living. So I didn't bring the coffee mug because it's just, we don't even need it, because I'm going to tell you what it says. So I have this coffee mug, and my coffee mug says, I have a good heart, but this mouth. And I saw this coffee mug in like this like novelty shop, and I was like, that is so me. This is like a few years ago. I bought the coffee cup, and I swear I didn't bring it because it's like cracked, and I like glued the outside because I like the coffee mug, because I felt like, that resonated with me, right? And it's something that I also believe about myself and other people. Like, people might have just a rough day, or, they just pop off, but it doesn't have anything to really do with their heart. Like their heart is not in a bad place. It's just their mouth, their mouth just gets the best of them. And honestly, it's a very toxic vantage point. I'll just make the fat story slim. It's toxic because in the Torah, there's no detachment from your thought and your mouth. There's no detachment from your heart, which is your authority within, and what your mouth says. Zero. And so really what happens is we end up in a process of what I put down as verbal defecation. If you don't know what defecation is, it's like mouth poop, right? And it's a destructive form of communication. I was talking to, and this is so disgusting, but I'm going to share it because it's like, it's a practical example. So I was talking to a lady who works, and she's a psychologist and I think a nurse practitioner at a prison. And she works in the ward where prisoners are very much like just off the wall. And she said, when prisoners get upset, they will take their feces and throw it on you. And the imagery in my head, when I thought about that, like, it just like, it like literally, I was like, I would quit. That would be my last day at work. And as I'm sitting here giving you guys this example, how often do our words become the defecation that we put on people and force them to deal with, that make them just want to quit? Just make them like, I don't want to talk to you, I don't want to deal with you. And as I was processing this, and I've been processing this for a couple of months, I realized how much we as humans exchange words and don't understand where words come from, how words function, how the mouth functions, and how the tongue functions. And so when I went to Proverbs 31, the reason why I went there is a bunch of places you can go in the text that talk about the mouth, the tongue, the whatever, but specifically because this woman placed in Proverbs 31 is the standard. She's a standard for how not only you want to be perceived, but how you want other people to perceive you as a woman of Yah. And so then everything that's listed there has a practical application that can be applied to everyday life to not only make you a better person, but a better woman and a better person in community. And so we know that scripture says like the tongue is, but a little member, right? It's but a little member, but it can cause a whole world of trouble. We're going to get to that. And very few people teach us how to, check this out, close our mouths, but also keep our peace. See, when you are in life, you have these like two polar opposites, and these two things can't really exist together, to have a closed mouth, but to also still have peace. And I'm not talking about this like, oh, I have to really work on this piece, and not like work on the piece, but I'm really in turmoil inside, but I'm pretending to be at peace with me not saying anything. Because if you're anything like me, I'm always keep it 100% real. If I keep my mouth closed, oh, the mind is going. I'm like, it is like, especially if I feel like I've been offended or I should say something back, I am like in a state of grief inside. Like I'm literally like angry. Like that's where like the tears come from. Like I'm crying. Like I didn't say anything, but literally my eyes are pouring because it is killing me inside that I've allowed myself to be offended. And I did not respond, even if whatever the response was. Like I let somebody treat me like that and I didn't say anything. We're going to talk about where that comes from. But literally, we know that to know function, we have to become intimate with function, which means we have to practice it. And I will tell you, just as like if you don't catch it any further than this, that the practice of peace begins within, and then it's going to make its way to the other members of your body. And really, the function of function is done through prayer and practice. And so after this lesson, you're not going to unless a miracle happens, you're not going to walk away and say, I'm never going to feel like that when a person says these things to me, or I'm never going to respond, because that is the easiest way to fall off the track of perfection. And I'm not talking about being perfect, never make a mistake. I mean, the process of perfecting. We give up on that process when we tell ourselves we're going to make a change. And then when those moments or those things come up that put us back in that position and bring that old self back up, and we respond the same, then we say, nothing we did in that whole process works. And that's not really how the brain works. And that's not how perfecting works. You have to come face to face, and you will sometimes fail, but every time you fail and then restructure and then recover, you've created a new way of thinking and a new way of reacting. And the more you do it, even the more you fail at it and then correct it, the better you'll be at it, when it comes up. And so I wrote down, it's funny when who thought, or which one of us thought, I guess, that the disruptor of peace is not the problem. It's not the person who disrupts the peace that's the problem. It's the unpeaceful response of the person whose peace has been disrupted that really caused the issue. And so as I'm thinking about this, in my mind, scripture says a kind word turns away wrath. And you're like, but if a person's wrathful to me, it seems like the very furthest thing away from me to be is to now return with kindness. It's like the struggle. Sounds to me like the struggle. It is. But when the underdeveloped protagonist, that would be the person who is being affected by the antagonist, the one that's antagonizing. When the underdeveloped protagonist has an unrefined response, then they are complicit. They are helping in perpetuating the dysfunction that they don't like. That bothers me. That bothers me. My aunt, me and my aunt were talking. I was going through some things and she's like, I get and I see what's happening, but your response sucks. Like what you're doing and how you're responding is only making it worse. And I'm like, you're my aunt and you're supposed to be on my side. And she's like, no, you have to be in control of you, because when you're not in control of you, you're letting that person control you, which then spirals and then adds additional anger and additional emotions to something that could have been easily dealt with. So in Proverbs 31, it says, and the law of kindness is on her tongue. The text, when you read it, it'll say the law of kindness is in her mouth as one of the translations. And let me share my screen so you all can see it. But the verse before it is actually the verse that gives you the mouth portion. So it's actually very poetic, very scientific, which we'll get into. And it has already dealt with the actual opening of the mouth. Now it's dealing specifically with the tongue. So, and Proverbs starts right there at Proverbs 31:26. She openeth her mouth with wisdom. This is all one sentence, by the way. And in her tongue is the law of kindness. So I completely nerded out because I'm like, okay, mouth is just like the opening, but the tongue is like what's inside the mouth. What's so important about the tongue, right? Like what's so important about it? Why is the tongue this like thing that all of this weight when it comes to Torah of Hesed? Torot Hesed. What is this law that's embedded in the tongue? I'm gonna give you guys just a little bit of this scientific part. So the human tongue is connected. I'm gonna give you these words and I'll tell you what they mean. To the amygdala circuitry. These are all like nerves and things that are connected, which is governed by the frontal lobe. It helps, communication, the frontal lobe. This is like so elementary. My version, I know somebody out there is like, there's so much more to that. This is my version. I'm going to send you guys the links to the videos of smart people who, if you want to know like how all these things work, they'll give it to you. The frontal lobe is a part of the brain that helps with executive functioning. Executive functioning is defined as literally expressive language, movement, and managing of higher level executive functions. So your frontal lobe has a dominant side on either the left or the right, and it controls your speech. And it controls literally like how words are formed, because, you know, speech is part of words formed. It does a bunch more. It controls like your impulse response and all of these amazing things. Your amygdala processes decision-making, memory, emotional responses that are connected to fear, anxiety, or aggression. And all of these things have a nerve that also attaches to your tongue. So the tongue, on a basic sense, on like the real like scientific side, without making the other connections, it's for taste, right? You taste with your tongue. You have nerves on your tongue, so you know when something's hot, when something's cold, and it sends signals to your brain. So Yah knows, and science knows now, that literally the tongue is connected to the brain. It's actually on, and I wrote it down because I said I wasn't going to forget. The tongue is on the 12th, I think, cranial, let me see. I wasn't going to forget this. Your tongue is on like the 12th cranial nerve, and there's like, and it's connected in a way that I told you. It knows when something tastes bad, right? And normally when something tastes bad, it's a signal that it's poison. When something tastes good, it's like, okay, this can be nourishment for my body. And so all of these things are connected, and your brain is thinking as your tongue is experiencing. So you probably have already made this connection. So if my tongue is saying, if my tongue is being used as a muscle for speech, then guess what? My brain is also hearing and interpreting the movement and the muscles and the forming of my tongue to make words, and it's communicating it back to me. It's giving me response. It's telling me, am I responding out of fear? Am I responding out of emotion? Am I responding out of anger? And then I have my amygdala and I have my brain literally working hand in hand with my tongue. So my cup was really stupid, if you want to just, because the cup is based upon person's interpretation, a human activity, but it is completely opposed to what Yah says. The cup says, oh, I have a good heart, but this mouth, as if the mouth and the heart exist separately, right? This tongue and the mind exist separately, where scientifically the tongue and the mind have nerves that are literally connected, telling it how to function, telling you how to eat, telling you how to ingest, telling you how to speak. There's no disconnection between the lev, which is the authority within that exists in the mind, and how the mouth functions. So if your mouth is dysfunctional, your mind is dysfunctional, period. This is Torah. And even if, and Messiah says this, even if your mouth is closed, your mind can still be dysfunctional, but you don't let anybody know it. There's like the older people that say like, you could have just kept quiet and not let anybody know you were stupid. But as soon as you open your mouth, you let everybody know. So there's also that thing. It doesn't mean that a person does not have a dysfunctional mind just because they're quiet, right? They've just learned, I don't like the response when I open my mouth, so it's better that I just stay quiet. There are a lot of people who've experienced abuse, trauma, and other things. It doesn't mean that they're not experiencing it. They just don't say anything because maybe they don't expect anything to change, or like, if I open my mouth, it's gonna be like floodgates, right? It's gonna be like it's gonna all spew out. So we're gonna look at today, I'm gonna give you the Hebrew word for tongue, beautiful word, by the way. We're gonna look at and focus on, we are like takeaway, which is let the words of my mouth. Now it starts like all these verses start to be like, ugh. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing unto you. And it moves, right? It moves this Proverbs 26. She opened her mouth with wisdom. Wisdom is actually the idea of, if you go back to the Hanukkah study, I go over like the palate and the mouth. Wisdom is like this idea of how we are trained to take in. And so then, and her tongue is now the finishing, which is how we swallow and how we ingest and how we put it back out. So with this, we're saying, oh my gosh, yeah, you created this tongue, you created this mind, you're in control of it, right? Set a guard over my mouth. right? Like all these verses should just immediately start to bubble over. And how then should I be speaking as a woman who's seeking to meet the standard? I should be speaking according to the Torah of kindness. There is an actual Torah that should be governing my mouth, governing my tongue. And that's deep. I'm just like, that's deep. Okay. So we're going to cover tongue, the word for tongue. We're going to cover the word for, and the word for, I'll give you Torah, but most people know Torah, but I'll give you that one in brief, and then we'll do the word for kindness. I want to do a little activity though, because the person might be like, how is the tongue and the mind connected? You gave all these words and you said amygdala and frontal lobe and you lost me. So let me show you. I'm going to ask you some questions. All right. Where am I? I have a list of questions. Okay. So let me show you how you can think and tell your tongue what to do. Go ahead while you're sitting here and take your tongue and touch the roof of your mouth. Were you able to do that? Like you put a thumbs up, okay. Make your tongue go to the left. Now tell it to go to the right. All right. Now you don't have to turn on your speaker or anything, but say hi. I'll even tell you to say it in another language. Say it in Hebrew, say shalom. All right. So the question is, are you in control of your tongue? Because if I said it right now and you didn't say it, guess what? You chose not to respond to my prompt to do something with your tongue. So then you and your brain are in control with your tongue. I'll give you another one just in case you're like, she said it, so I did it. All right. Let's see, what else can you do with your tongue? Touch your tongue right behind your teeth. But when they don't do it, how about this? Don't touch your tongue right between your teeth, but do the opposite of what I say. Can you do the opposite of what I say? I'll say, I'm having a great day. Now do the opposite of that and do nothing. Now don't say I'm having a great day. Now do the opposite of that and actually say it. So you can take a command and do the opposite of what you want to do if you want to do it. I know, and we'll get to this, I know it's a lot more difficult when we have these other emotions and things put in. So that's why there's another thing, and we'll get to this on another day, but we also have a responsibility of women to put our emotions into subjection to Torah. Because often it's the emotion and the feeling that causes us to want to do one thing, but we cannot do it. All right. Oh, yes, it was the 12th cranial nerve. Okay, I found it. The 12th cranial nerve originates in the medulla and travels to the tongue. And that's where you get tongue muscle control. That's why you're able to do part of what we just did right now. And that amygdala I talked about, that's what sent the information. And that's how you get that brain-tongue connection. And then you have the frontal lobe, which communicates with the amygdala. And if you didn't feel threatened, or if you didn't feel angry, then that process was a lot easier. But how about this? What if I punched you in the face? And I'm just going to give you like an extreme. And then I said, now tell me I'm your favorite person in the whole world. That would be a very, very difficult bridge to gap, right? I've shown you something. I've triggered your fight or flight response. Now you want to punch me back in the face. And then I told you to say something kind to me. So trauma then disrupts our ability to control our tongue, to control our mind, to do the things we want to do. And so really one of the things that you'll probably have to unpack once we get through all of this is, what is the trauma between me and the people that I cannot control my mouth with? And that's something where I talked about prayer and practice. That's the thing between you and Yah. And then the correction that needs to be made in the loving relationship between you and that person. Why? The why question. Why are these responses triggered and I can't do the thing that the law of kindness is going to tell me to do toward this particular person or these particular people. And then how can I allow Yah to regulate my mind and use my mouth to communicate what I need from these people to disrupt my pattern of participating in the dysfunction? Because the person may not even be still doing the thing that made you now respond the way you respond to them. That may have been long off. That could have been 20 years ago. But the crazy thing about the mind is we don't remember what people say to us. Let's go to James chapter 3 before we get into these words. James chapter 3. Oh, if you haven't read this yet, or if it's been a while, it's going to get real good. It says, my brethren, or my sisterin, right? Be not many masters. Know that we shall receive the greater condemnation. For in many things we offend all. If any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect man and able also to bridle his whole body. So if a person can speak and not offend people, it's like, oh, that person got it made, because he can literally control his whole body. I control my response. I control my emotions. I control my fight or flight. I control how my mind is regulated. It's a person who is very, very conscious of all of their interactions, what they say, they're listening, they're taking it all in. They're a very regulated person, which means that they're not stressed. They're taking everything and processing it. They're going to take it in prayer. They're going to see it, and then they respond, which means I'm not going to offend with my words. Behold, we put bits in the horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. If you've never ridden a horse, you probably won't understand that, but a horse is a huge animal. It is a very, very strong animal, much stronger than any rider who can ever ride a horse. But that thing in their mouth, they don't like how it feels. It agitates them when you pull on it. So if you just tug a little, they'll just do what you want them to do, because they don't like that. If they buck and you pull, that hurts so much. That area is so sensitive that from that area, you can control the whole body. So this correlation, right, is this thing, this mouth of yours, right, it needs, if you will, to be controlled so that the whole body can be regulated. And other people's mouths need to be controlled so that other people can be regulated. It's not a one-sided thing. This is an everybody thing. It's not just a woman thing. It's a male thing too. So it says, the verse 4 says, behold, also the ships, which though they be so great and are driven of fierce winds, yet they are turned about by a very, very small portion of the ship, whithersoever the governeth listen. So if you've done it with multiple things. Airplanes are a thing that we're more familiar with these days. We use them. You see that little bitty little thing with the tiny wheels, and they pull them in and they attach it to the front of the airplane to try to move it around. When they, what do they call it? Taxi an airplane in and out. It's that little bitty thing moving that huge airplane. And so it's giving reference to something very, very small, right? That has a lot of control, not only over other people, but over our own bodies. So he goes and he makes a connection. Verse 5, even so, the tongue is a little member. It's like one of the smallest things in your body. It's not a heart, it's not a brain. It's a little member, and it boasteth great things, but it has great power. Behold, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. So this is a Hebrew connection. You're going to see it in just a second. The Hebrew words, the English words are the Hebrew equivalents. I should say the Hebrew translations of the word tongue. You get fire, you get the word for tongue, you get the word for gulf and direction, because all of this happens in the mouth. Hebrew is very practical. So when he goes to fire, he's using his Hebraic mind to make this make sense. So if you guys have heard of Pentecost, right, it says, and cloven tongues like fire. That's actually a Hebrew like phrase, because the tongue has the ability to what? It can incite. It can consume things. We'll get to that in a second. So he says, how great a matter a little fire kindleth. And the tongue, look at this is all Hebrew, is a fire, a world of iniquity. So is the tongue among our members, that it defileth the whole body and setteth on fire the course of nature, and it is set on fire of hell. For every kind of beast, of birds and serpents, and of things in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind. But the tongue no man can tame. It is an unruly evil, full of deadly poison. Therewith bless we Elohim, even the Father, and therewith curse we men, which are made after the similitude of Elohim. Out of the same mouth proceeded blessing and cursing. My brethren, these things ought not so to be. Doth the fountain send forth at the same place sweet water and bitter? And can the fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries, either a vine figs? So can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. Who is a wise man and undue with knowledge among you? Let him show out of a good conversation his works with meekness, that is power under control. It don't mean you weak. And of wisdom. But if you have bitter envy and strife in your what? Lev, in your heart and your mind, glory not, and lie not against the truth. This wisdom descended not from above, but is earthly, sensual, and devilish. For where envy and strife is, there is confusion in every evil work. The mind, the heart can't be good if the mouth is bad, right? Scripture says, out of the abundance of the heart, out of the lev, the mouth speaks. So a person who has a dysfunctional mind and then says things, but this is messed up, they're a liar. And a person who says they have a good mind and they can't control their mouth, they're a liar. Why? Those two things cannot disagree with each other. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure, it's clean, then it's peaceable. So people who just want to stir up things that are not peaceful, it's not from Yah, because it's not Yah's wisdom. Oh, Yah said, Yah told me to say, Yah told me to talk to you like this. No, he didn't. Because first it's pure, then it's peaceful, then it's gentle and easy to be taken in. It's full of mercy, good fruits, and without partiality. I'm not favoring myself in the situation. I'm not favoring another person. It's not partial and it's not hypocritical. I'm not going to tell you something I'm not going to do myself. And the fruit of righteousness is sown in peace of them that make peace. These people who write this stuff, we should listen to them. Stop letting people tell you you shouldn't read these writers. Because I could see literally 20 instances in probably the last 60 days that could be solved with just this chapter out of what people call the New Testament that has no relevance or no importance and nobody should look at it because it was written by people who were evil and wicked. That's like an evil and wicked person to me. It sounds like a person who understood Torah. Sounds like a person that understood the function of the body. Sounds like the person that understood the regulation of a community by how we speak. Sounds like a person who wanted peace and was not trying to be deceptive or deceive a bunch of people. This is important. This is very important. So when we'll tie this in, because when we talk about it, and I want you to literally keep this verse in your mind when you talk about applying the law of kindness on your tongue, because this literally just gave you the plug, the key, and everything else to how to deal with things, how when you're not dealing with them, how you're viewed, and what the overall picture is. All right, let's look at these words. I don't have my pen in front of me, so just know that it's gonna look a little interesting as I write with this, my finger, but it'll work. I'm gonna write with my mouse. All right, so let's deal with this tongue. So we kind of dealt with how the tongues connect to the brain. I told you I'll share with you some information of, you know, how that actually works scientifically. Like the guy literally takes a head, he takes a tongue out, and he's like pointing to different places. If you really want to get into that thing, I think it's pretty cool. But the Hebrew word in this verse, and actually let me go back and show you where it is, so you don't think I just like grabbed a word out of thin air. So let's go back to Proverbs 31, verse 26. And if we go to verse 26, where it says, Piapatak, and he says, Bechokma, Vatorot Chesed al Leshona. So this right here, Ve Torat, that's like, it's like the Torah of, and then we have the word Chesed, and then it says al, upon, and then we have Leshona. That's, and that dot inside is, it means her. So this is her Leshon. And so our root for tongue, our root word for here for tongue is Leshon. Okay, that's the word for tongue. And that's where that comes from, right there. All right, so let's jump back over to our whiteboard, and I'm going to write down this word. So the word for tongue is Lamed Shin. And you guys have probably heard this. If you ever heard somebody refer to the Hebrew language or the Ivrit as Lashon Ivrit, right? Or the Hebrew tongue, that's the word for tongue. Why? Because it's language, it's how you speak. So the tongue is directly, obviously, related to that function of speech. This word, Lashon, is used 117 times. 117, not once, not twice, not 5 times, not 20 times, 117 times in the Tanakh. And it's translated as gulf, inlet, and language. Also translated as fire, a tongue, a bay, like, you know how like a part of the land goes out and it's shaped like that. So even things that are shaped like a tongue, like the tongue of something, like if you take like the part of it's like, oh, pull the tongue, right? We'll use those words. It's also translated as a divider. It's translated as a language. It's translated as to talk or to communicate. So let me go back to this Logos Bible app. Those of you who are in the Royal Roots Academy, you have this. If you don't have it and you're not in Royal Roots Academy, you can purchase it. There's, you know, it's logos.com, I think, and you can go on and, you know, download this and do the same thing that I'm getting ready to do. So if you go to this word Lashon, you can right click it. And then you can go, when the little pop-up menu comes, you can go to the Bible word study. And we're doing the Bible word study for this word here that's highlighted, which is Lashon. You click Bible word study, it's going to pop up this screen. It's going to give you all the different books that are used, like Brown Driver, Briggs, the Septuagint, the DBL Hebrew, you know, whatever is out there. It'll give you all the different translations that are into English for that word. If you scroll down, though, it will go to a place where it says textual searches for this particular word, specifically here in the Hebrew Bible. And when I click it, it's going to show me every place, and mine is split to do Hebrew and English. It's going to show me every place where this word Lashon is used. Now, it's not always going to be spelled exactly the same because Hebrew conjugate or parses out for gender and number for a lot of words. And this is one of those words. So maybe like their tongue. So it's going to be spelled differently. It might be after his tongue. So it's going to be spelled differently. But the root word, and if you haven't taken Hebrew class, it'd be a good plug too. You can see the root word in all of these words. So you see after their tongues and so forth. So where do these other translations come from? Because a lot of people are like, I don't understand why a person would not translate the word tongue in every instance and why it may be something else. So I'm going to go down to one of the places where it says bay or a gulf. And this is Joshua 15:2. And it says, and their south border was from the shore of the salt sea, from the bay that looked southward. So you could have said from the tongue that looks southward. So a person would have known, you know, the piece of land that kind of sticks out or is shaped like a tongue. But a person in English may not have understood that. So it's translated as bay, which is like, something that sticks out. They could have also said a peninsula, which also, kind of looks like, something that sticks out. You have water surrounding, and it's that like almost like U-shaped thing that a tongue looks like. Another translation here is Isaiah 5:24. Therefore, as the fire devoureth the stubble and the flame consumeth the chaff, so their root shall be as rottenness. Here you have the word as fire, but it's actually the word leshon, like the tongue, like how a flame, people say, if you ever heard this term, the fire licked up, like how the fire comes and just like kind of like just engulfs it. It's that idea of actually watching the function of one thing and applying it to the action of something else you see, so that a person can create a visual picture in their mind. All right, another one, where was it? It was a little bit further down. Okay, here's another, this is not necessarily a different translation, but Psalm 34:14 says, keep thy tongue from evil. You're like, how can I keep my tongue from evil? Well, if the tongue is now talking about the idea of function, dysfunction, regulation, then now you can see how your tongue can be dysfunctional and your lips can then be used to speak guile. So the function is interwoven in. A really good one was also Psalm 50, I think it's Psalm 52. The tongue deviseth mischiefs. It's like, how does the tongue devise something if there's no brain in the tongue? But now that we know that the tongue is connected to cranial nerves, now you're like, oh, the brain and the tongue, they have this thing where they work together. And like a sharp razor, they work deceitfully. See how that works? How that you can see that connection? Torah, right, is showing us the connection, even the scientific connection between this small member in our mouths and our brain, and how they work together to do some really jacked up stuff, some really irreparable things, unfortunately. All right, that's enough. I think you can get my point of like, oh, okay, a person's not just making up these things when they talk about the tongue, they're actually in the scripture, and it's embedded in our ability to read the text and see it in its fullness. All right, so let's go back to our whiteboard. So we have Lashon, we see how it's translated. To look up some of these other translations, I have the Ancient Hebrew Lexicon, and it's number 2325 on page 64. And it gives us the 3-letter root, because this word can also be broken down to 3-letter root, which is lamed, shin, and then final nun. And it deals with the wagging of the tongue when one is talking, because when you're talking, your tongue is moving. So your tongue is moving. And if you don't believe me, just start talking and you'll see that tongue is literally, it's moving all around your mouth. It's forming words. The better you get at talking, guess what? The faster that thing can move, which means the faster it can start a fire too. It also deals with the wagging of the tongue in slander. It means to move your tongue against someone. The tongue carries with it a negative and positive charge. And a lot of Hebrew words come with this. It can be used for good or for bad. So let's look at the function of the tongue by putting it into our pictograph form. So we have a lamed, which is a shepherd's staff. And then we have a shin, which is like your two teeth, your 2 front teeth. And then we have a nun, which is fish seed activity, like life. All right. So let's look at the function of the tongue and see if everything we learned as we talked about science and we talked about the text, if it could have been seen, slow down my tongue, if it could have been seen, if you will, in just regular observed environment by a Hebrew person. So a lamed, which is a shepherd's staff, is used to direct and to chastise. You see those two split things. Okay. Shin, it can be something where you eat and nourish, which your tongue has a primary function for. It helps you eat, move food around, clean your teeth, everything. You can eat or you can destroy something with it. The same thing that can nourish your body can literally destroy your body. And then the last one, which is a seed, it can give life. So Torah has a verse, right? Tanakh has a verse that says, life and death are in the power of the tongue. Destroy life in the word for tongue. See, we think that people were just like, oh my gosh, they were sitting around and they were just getting all of these downloads. These downloads come from first observing the natural things Yah put in front of us. Nobody has this ultra spiritual experience where they can just overpass all the natural things Yah put for us to observe to better understand him and come up with this like amazing concept. No, literally, the word tongue has life and death in it. It doesn't make it any more extraordinary. It just makes it something that is not kept just for people who sit down and meditate all day. Yah was like, if you look around and you watch the function of things and how I literally arranged all of human existence, you'll begin to see, if you'll just go along with my function, you'll be able to understand a lot of things a lot better. Just so you don't think this is just a word that, oh, it was only the Hebrew people that understood this. No, other people who lived in an agrarian, very much functional, concrete language community, which is primarily a Semitic community, which all language kind of sprouted from, also had the same understanding. In Aramaic, the word is pronounced lishan. In Ugarit, it's lashon, very similar to Hebrew. In Arabic, it's lisan. In Ethiopic or in Amharic, it's lesan. And Akkadian, it's lishanu. This idea of the function and this understanding goes all the way back to antiquity. That's why when a person said something, it could be a declaration of war because it showed how a person thought and what they had the propensity to do. So you have this tongue, right? And in your tongue, we talked about how you can think and tell your brain what to do. We talked about how we have these nerves and this vagus nerve and the amygdala that they're finding out is attached to the tongue. And then you have the 12th circuit of the cranial nervous system that's attached to the tongue. And then you have this palatal glossus. We did this last week. We're like, why didn't Yah just say it like that? Because if he would have said, you know, you have these nerves running through and all these nerves are attached here, 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 and here and doing like this. And you'd been like, what? So Yah said, you need some Torah of Hesed for your tongue, for your speech, for your language. So let's look at what Hesed is. Let's look at what this kindness is. And kindness, just like the duality, if you will, of the tongue, has two sides. It has two sides. So the word for kindness is Hesed. It's Het, Samik, and Dalit. And the word can be defined as devote oneself entirely to being selfless, given to needs, so like to meet the needs of someone else, can also be used to shame. And you can sinfully devote yourself to something. We have learned, right, that the tongue, right, needs a law. And this idea of the law of, it means that the tongue has a law prescribed to it. That's what was literally laid out by James. It was literally the law that he saw, and literally what we're seeing in these words, that is ascribed to how you use your tongue. The two-letter root for this word is Het, Samik. And this word that can be used as to shame can also be a place of refuge, a place where someone is supported. And when it's done functionally, because the mouth, right, a rebuke from a mouth controlled by the law of kindness can be received. We saw that in James. And it becomes in a refuge where I go to a person where I know I'm not just going to hear what I want to hear, but I'm going to hear what I need to hear and I can receive it. And every time they speak, I don't put up these defenses. And unfortunately for many of us, when it comes to our children, our spouses, and so forth and so on, they're getting water out of a mixed well. So we will curse them with the same mouth that we want them to hear our wisdom from, where we want to be consulted from. And so how and when we use it, and if it's not attached to us being regulated, we shouldn't, is a direct effect on our relationship and our ability to dwell together as equals, The word hesed literally means to bow the neck or to bow the head as a response to an equal. If the law of kindness is supposed to be on our tongues, then when we're dealing with individuals, especially our spouses, we have to learn to bow our tongue in meekness and humility to an equal, because a lot of the times, and unfortunately, a lot of us as Hebrew women, I'm not going to say other women don't, but I know how we can pop off. We will speak down, where we put that person in a place of a child. When we talk to them, we don't talk to them like we talk to equals. And if we can be honest, and especially them and our adult children and so forth and so on, unfortunately, we see this and they see it, because when we talk to, let's say, our boss, or to our friends or people who we view as equals, who we don't want them to see this ugly side of our disrupted dysfunction, we speak to them in a way so that we don't speak down to them. It's always better to speak up to somebody, right? But the natural inclination is in the speak down. And what do? If we've been belittled, we want to belittle the person, which then puts us into this spiral of dysregulation, which then creates a negative response. And then literally puts in our mind an imprint, because guess what? Whether you respond negatively or positively, the brain recorded it. And the more you respond in any particular way, that becomes imprinted until you do something to disrupt that. And Torah is the most amazing disruptor, because it puts, literally, talk about like what Paul said, if I had not known Torah, I wouldn't have known sin. I wouldn't have known dysfunction. Torah makes you see your dysfunction and gives you a pathway to then use the function that your brain has, which is neuroplasticity, to create new neurological paths to be able to do something different. It gives you the framework to do something different. In this case, the law of Hesed gives you the framework of how to use your tongue and use your mouth differently. Peep this, not only to yourself, not only to other people, not only to your children or to your friends, but also to yourself. Because this same law of kindness is going to disrupt all those negative patterns in all of those areas. All right, so we know the tongue, right, can operate as a double-edged sword. And it can be used for kindness or to shame. It can be used for affection and to show mercy or to scorn. Now, guess what? Both of those functions under Torah are righteous. Both of those things under Torah are considered righteous. So for instance, you're not always going to say nice things. Kindness and nice are two different things. So, but you don't say mean things. You don't say dysfunctional things. So for instance, if I tell my children, if you don't do X, Y, and Z, this is the consequence, that may not feel good. But the way I say it and how I execute it, if I do that in righteousness, it will create the proper response. But if I go and say, you little you now I tore them down. Now I wounded them. And yes, I got what I wanted, but now somebody else is damaged. But yes, check this out. And because I got the response I wanted, my brain says, now do it like that again, even though that wasn't functional. So a lot of times when we get what we want out of using our mouth incorrectly, or all the time, we tell our brains, record that. And when that situation happens again, respond like that, because you got the results you wanted. Just because we get the results we want, or we think we want, from the way we speak and the way we do things, does not mean that that's righteous. And just because we don't get the response we want, doesn't mean that Yah's not working in the midst of it, because Yah sees everything. And to be blameless in speech, like he said, is a person who is whole. Because now a person can't come back and say, well, you did, or you said, nope, they never did. A person can literally talk about you, talk about you. No, but she never actually said, da, 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 da. She never. So then guess what? That gives you the lie to say, oh, so that was a dysregulation that happened in your own mind that you then use to project outwardly. But then as a person, you can sleep at night knowing I didn't do a person, or I didn't respond to a person in a way that now puts me in a place of contempt between me and my creator. I followed Torah that governed my speech, and now I am blameless, and now Yah can deal with my enemies. And when I say enemy, it's not always somebody that like, oh, the person's my enemy. No, it's a person that has made themselves adversarial to you based upon how they acted. And you have made yourself a friend of Yah, and how you responded, and it places Yah then face to face with your enemies and not you. So the question is, and it's a question that should be posed, now that we know that the law of kindness not only just deals with the idea of something that is controlling, but also something that is being used properly, then we have to reflect and say, are my words a place of safety for people? Is my mouth a place of refuge for people? Do I restrain my tongue and seek Yah? And do I spare someone from my words when I'm in a state of dysregulation? And those are questions that we can really process through before we speak. And I'm talking of somebody who literally, I'm almost like, it's like, yeah, why me? But I get it, because this is like something that like is a constant thing where I find myself constantly having to then correct my words. And that is also a process, because a lot of times when our words leave, we're like, okay, the damage is done. You can undo the damage of your words. You can undo them by coming back and apologizing for restating what you said and saying, you know what, I should not have said it like this. This is why, and how, this is why I said it like this, and this is how I should have said it. And the response, the response and the feelings that my words created for you when I spoke to you, dysregulated, are not okay. You can both have strong feelings and not have to tear someone down. You can both have strong feelings and not have to invalidate yourself, or literally to not be able to hold your peace because you are allowing somebody to walk over you. There's a proper way. And Torah shows us that proper way, where it's like, no, I can rebuke, but I can rebuke in love. I can rebuke with the intent to save the relationship and not say, you know, I'm just going to say what I'm going to say, and I'm just going and just put it out there and go, okay, and then you can deal with it after that. I said what I said. It's not how we speak. That's not how we deal with one another, because literally Torah, so to be like the word we spend the least amount of time on, the idea of Torah is the word yara, which means to cause to come down or to point into a particular direction. And we see it with like the pointing of the finger or the falling down of rain. When we speak to somebody without direction and without the intent of nourishing, we curse them. So a lot of people say, oh, you can't say bad words. That's what that means. When you are not intending to nourish someone, you are cursing them. You're literally cursing them. And that is equally as bad as cussing them out. But you could never say a cuss word, and literally be cursing them at a magnitude much greater, because what? Words drive the direction of people. So you could never physically harm a person, but your words can cause them to live in a space in their mind where they're unsure about themselves, where they don't trust themselves, where they don't think a certain way about themselves because of how you verbalize who they were or what they were. And if that's not consistent with who Yah said they are, then you keep that to yourself and you pray for Yah to regulate that within you. Because we watched last week as we went through Jeremiah, how even Yah refrained from calling Israel what they were doing in the midst of doing what they were doing. And if we're not exercising the same restraint that Yah has exercised over his people, then we're putting ourselves in a world of trouble. The last thing, and I think the most important one, is what are you teaching people about you, about Yah, and your relationship with Yah when you speak to them? Shalom.